Welcome to LionHeart Talks, a series of podcasts from LionHeart.
Hello and welcome to the LionHeart Talks podcast. This episode makes up part of our second series, and in today's episode we're going to be talking all about imposter syndrome. But before we go any further, let me introduce myself. I'm Jo Grant and I'm the Training and Wellbeing Projects Manager at LionHeart, and I'm pleased to be joined today by LionHeart Ambassador Emma Snipp. Emma, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, Jo. Thank you for having me here. So I'm Emma. A lot of people call me Snippy, Emma Snipp. So everyone calls me Snippy. And I'm a success and resilience coach that specialises with working with people in property and construction. And before becoming a coach, I was an asset manager in the City of London. I was in the City of London for like 12 years or something ridiculous, working in a commercial property, specialising in retail and industrial. So, and I also do a bit of work on the side, helping associate RICS grads with their submissions. So very much was in the world of property and still have feet and fingers in there.
So with that background, I guess you really understand imposter syndrome and also how it relates to the industry as well. So really useful for any RICS professionals that might be listening to us today. But it's something I only really know a little bit about. So I'm really keen to find out more. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about it today. So let's get into this and maybe start by looking at what imposter syndrome actually is.
Okay, yeah, great place to start. Makes sense. Imposter syndrome is a very interesting one. Because of the term syndrome, a lot of people don't like it, feel it doesn't apply to them. What they don't realise is that the women who coined it, so it was Professor Pauline Clance and psychologist Susan Ims in 1978 coined it originally about high achieving women, and then realised since that it isn't just for women. But when they originally coined it, imposter syndrome, apparently in hindsight they regret that because it isn't a syndrome, it's a behaviour, and it affects up to 70% of people at some point in their life. So it's really, really common.
Yep.
And it's one of those things that we tend to find actually impacts people more further in their career, especially in our industry. We tend to think, oh, if you're a grad or you're new, you're going to look around, you don't think you deserve to be there, everybody's looking at me, I haven't got a clue how this works. But actually, imposter syndrome tends to kick in later. And imposter syndrome tends to be an inability to internalise success. It's the inability to think, I deserve to be here, I'm good enough. It's that need to prove to other people that you've can keep up, that you've got everything sorted, that you know where you stand. And what tends to happen is as we move through our career, we often get to a point where we get to near our kind of ceiling in terms of seniority, and we start thinking, how did I get here? I'm a fraud. Everyone knows more than me. I don't really know what I'm doing. I've been making this up all along. The kids are coming through and they know more than I do. The market's changed. Everything's moving. At some point, I'm going to be found out. And that tends to be where a lot of people find themselves experiencing imposter syndrome. So a lot of people prefer terms like imposter phenomenon or just feeling like a fraud, feeling like you're going to get caught out. So you don't have to use the term imposter syndrome because it sounds quite medical. Yeah, it's not a mental health disorder or anything like that. It can lead to depression, anxiety, burnout, etc. But in its own right, it's more a sense of ill ease, really.
Okay. I know when I was doing a little bit of research before I spoke to you today, I saw the term imposter phenomenon, imposter thoughts, imposter syndrome. So I know there's sort of lots of different terms kind of describing, I guess, the same thing. One of the things I really wanted to sort of look at with you today was how it did affect different genders and how it might affect people in their different points in their career. Again, I think you probably maybe assume that as people go through their career, they're less likely to be affected by it because they know more. So it's really interesting to hear you say that actually it tends to affect people further into their career.
I think that's exactly why it kicks in, because you would assume that you should be more confident. You would assume by this point you know it all. And the truth is, I find with a lot of my clients that I work with, most people feel like they're making it up. And they're not. They have the knowledge, they have the experience, but the little voice in their head's telling them, right, every day we're winging it. Every day we don't know what's going on. And by this point in our career, that's not acceptable anymore. People are looking up to me. People expect me to have the knowledge. So imposter syndrome tends to turn up in 5 key ways. And most people experience 1, 2, or maybe 3 of them. So there's
Right.
kind of different ways it shows up. And they've got kind of terms to help you get your head around them. So the first one would be the perfectionist. And your perfectionist is somebody who sets themselves targets that are completely unachievable and unrealistic and unfair. And then they feel a deep sense of shame or regret or embarrassment when they don't hit them. And we're not talking about other people, we're talking about ourselves. So this could be someone who's completely, as a leader, completely easygoing. You know, I understand you, you're working at your pace, it's fine. But to themselves, everything's got to be 100%. And they don't achieve it. And then they start feeling those feelings of, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. The second one is Superman or Superwoman.
Right.
That's someone who makes excessive effort, like they go above and beyond all the time because they feel like they need to prove themselves. They need to do that
Okay.
little bit more, work that little bit harder, put in the extra hours because they don't want anybody to think they're average. They're frightened that they're going to look not good enough in comparison to everybody else just kind of idling along. Your third type is your natural genius. This is one that I've always struggled with. These are people who feel like they should just be good at something like that, like just naturally good at things. And they tend to be people who are typically quite good at a lot of things. They were possibly quite academic at school
Yep.
or really good at sport, tend to come top of the class in a lot of things. And so the mindset is from there on in, you should be excellent at everything straight away. And if you're not naturally good at it, you're somehow a failure. And that's where the
Right.
unworthiness kicks in. The fourth one is the soloist. So
Yep.
everybody probably knows one of these in the office. This is the sort of person who doesn't delegate at all and keeps everything to themselves. And that could be one of two things. Either they're frightened that they're going to be caught out, i.e., I've done all of this work, and if I pass it to you, you might see gaps in it, and then you think I'm not good enough,
Yep.
and I don't want to be caught out. And there'll be gaps I don't know exists. Or the other one is people think that asking for help is a weakness.
Yep.
You know, that if I can't do it all by me, all by myself, then clearly I'm not good enough.
Yep.
So that's the soloist. And then the last type is an expert. And I think a lot of people fall into this one. The expert is a person who feels like they should know everything about everything. And so if we think of it from, you know, the example we were given earlier of someone who's in the property or construction industry and they've been doing it 25 years and they've got to a point of seniority, they just feel like I should have the answer to all of the questions. I've been doing this long enough. I've been around the block enough times. I've got enough networks. I've got enough projects under my belt that I should have all of the knowledge. So when the APC grad comes to me and they ask me a question and I don't know the answer, then clearly I'm a failure. And that means that somebody else is going to catch me out too. So that idea that we have to be good at everything.
Right.
Those are the 5 kind of key types that show up. And it's really interesting if you stop and think about it. Quite often people go, "Oh yeah, I do that. Oh yeah, I do that. Oh yeah, I do that."
Exactly what I was doing as you went through them. Think the one thing as you went through all of those though that really stood out was it really is about the individual, the way that they put the pressure on themselves, and it's all internal, isn't it, rather than coming from sort of external sources.
Absolutely is. So it's a matter of confidence and resilience. And it's very natural. It's something that if you have these feelings, you shouldn't beat yourself up about. It's very normal, very natural. But you should spot, awareness is the key, spot the signs of it and start doing some kind of work, whether on your own, with a therapist, with a coach, with a mentor, whatever you need to do to get your confidence up, because it can end up really eroding you. And it's entirely internal because, you know, if you look at these people, they've got 25 years plus experience, you know, 9 times out of 10, they do know the answers. And if they don't know the answers, they know who to ask. And in my mind, like that's everybody's definition of confidence is personal. We've all got our own idea of what confidence is. And often one of the things I ask clients is, what is confidence to you? People go, oh, they've never thought about it before. They know they want it, but they don't know what it is or what it means to them.
Yeah,
To
that makes
me,
sense.
confidence is having the ability to know that I will figure it out.
Yeah.
And if I can't figure it out, I know who I can find someone to speak to who will.
Yep.
So it's that understanding that it's okay if I don't know something,
Yep.
I'll get there. So then I feel comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yep.
With imposter syndrome, it can make us feel like when we're in that grey area, when we're uncomfortable, everything starts falling down. We start believing we're not good enough, we're unworthy, we're useless, we're embarrassing, we're ashamed of ourselves, rather than feel, well, I can't know everything. It's
Yeah.
perfectly natural. Maybe I did know this, maybe I've forgotten, maybe I need to find out, maybe it's something new. All okay. And vulnerability, especially in leadership, is very, very important. It builds trust and connection. So saying to somebody else, you know what, I don't actually know that, but we'll find out, is a really powerful thing to do. And once you start getting the habit of that, your brain goes, okay, we don't know. It's clearly okay. No one's going to die. It's all fine. This is property, not brain surgery. No one's on the table. It's fine. And you can start working on that sense of dread and understanding it's just this voice trying to keep you down. You're okay.
Yeah.
You're okay.
So you mentioned confidence and awareness and some of the different signs and ways people might be feeling. What's some of the ways that they could work on that, or what would their next steps be if they were recognizing that that might be holding them back?
That's a good question. I think, first of all, you want to have a think about what you're looking out for. So you're looking out for that feeling of needing someone else's approval constantly, feeling like you're going to be caught out, feeling like you're not good enough, feeling like you have to work harder than everybody else, not believing that you're capable. And also, appreciating that there will be things in life where perhaps you do need a bit more knowledge, perhaps you are behind the curve. Say, for example, you've just finished your APC and you're a new surveyor. You are going to know a lot less than somebody who's got 25 years experience. There are things that you learn from being on the job that you don't learn from, studies. That's life. There's a very different emotional response to, oh, this is tough, I've got a long way to go, and I'm not good enough, I'm never going to get this. So it's paying attention to the sort of feelings that come up. And we talk about imposter syndrome. We say that there's 4 Ps, right? There's 4 Ps
Okay.
of imposter syndrome, and they tie in quite nicely with those types that we were talking about earlier. So the
Right.
first is perfectionism, and that's as it sounds. Again, it's someone who sets unreasonable targets on themselves and gets upset when they don't meet them.
Yeah.
So you've got really high sense of what is right. Procrastination. I know I'm terrible for this. That's when you sabotage yourself when there's something you need to do or think about or action. And you end up saying, you know what, I'm just going to, go and do the ironing instead. All of a sudden, that ironing pile sat there for 3 months, looks really appealing. So there's procrastination. Paralysis. Paralysis is when there's so much to do or think about, you just feel overwhelmed and you don't even know where to start, and you just sit there and stare at the computer. And we've all done that. You might be having an email that you need to write to someone and you just sit and stare at a blank screen for ages. And the last one is performance.
Right.
That's when someone, again, over prepares. If you find yourself being so nervous going into a meeting that you're going to get blindsided, and you don't want to be the person that says, oh, I don't know, I'll get back to you. And saying, I don't know, I get back to you feels something that you just couldn't say. That feels unprofessional to you. You over prepare and take in all of the notes that you're never going to need, then you're probably showing performance.
Right.
So if you think of those 4 Ps, perfectionism, procrastination, paralysis, or performance, if you find yourself experiencing those fairly regularly, the likelihood is you're struggling with imposter syndrome. Once you recognize you've got it, awareness is key. There are plenty of things you can do. I mean, the most sensible thing to do, obviously, in the realms of this podcast, is to speak to LionHeart. They have the support, they have the coaches, you've got the ambassadors.
Yep.
You can also talk to your own company if they've got well-being or a decent support system there. There's probably things you can do internally. If it's that you have no confidence in terms of your abilities, you can get a mentor. So that might be somebody who just gives you a little bit of extra nudging along the way with things that are more practical and might just make you feel more confident because there's someone there to fall back on. But also you can work with someone like me who will help you unpick why you have the beliefs that you're not good enough.
Right.
What's happened before, what's sitting underneath that's telling you, that's allowing that voice to tell you, we've been here before, you're not good enough. You know that, right? That's everybody else is exceeding, we're being left behind. HR are going to knock on the door, they should never have given you that promotion, they're going to strip your money down, you're going to get the sack next time, all of that. So there's a reason that voice is coming up, and when you work with a coach or a therapist, depending on whether it's a mental health angle, you can start understanding those little bits. So it's recognizing it first, then it's understanding where it's coming from and why, and when it shows up. Is there a certain person that talks to you in the office that makes you feel particularly like it? Is there
Yep.
one person that makes you feel like you're useless, or is it just a feeling you've got internally that no one else is aware of? Because a lot of people are very good at masking, particularly at high up in their careers. I've been doing this a long time. I can't let anyone know.
Mhm.
And then it's doing the work either on your own or someone else. So just kind of building that space so that you understand these feelings are coming. I know they're not real. I know I'm fine. What do I need to do right now to believe that? What resources do I need? What actions do I need to take? What beliefs do I need to have to just remind myself that this is a sabotage? It's not real.
Okay, so I just wanted to go back and revisit some of the things we've already discussed. We've talked about how imposter syndrome might be more likely to show up later in our career, but I think it'd be really good if we could perhaps identify situations or how it might look in different situations if you were early in your career, and also how that might vary for imposter syndrome early in your career, how it might differ to later in your career.
Early in your career, obviously you've got the fear that you're not going to fit in longer term. Perhaps this is not, you might think this is not, maybe not the career for me. Am I in the right place? But it tends to be more, I find in my experience, it tends to be more things around identity. So say, for example, you didn't do one of the grad schemes to get through your APC and you followed a different route. You might think, well, because I didn't do a grad scheme and everyone else did, I don't deserve to be here. I'm not as good as them. Perhaps you went to a different school to everybody else. I know when I was training, I didn't do a grad scheme, and I also felt very aware of the fact that I was a woman and the fact that I was working class. And it seemed to
Right.
me at the time that there were no other working class women, and there were, but I hadn't met them. And so in my head, I was like, I am not supposed to be here because I am not like everybody else. And a lot of people, especially early in their career, when they haven't got to that point where they feel they've established their own kind of identity, their own stamp yet, people don't necessarily recognize who they are as an individual, and you're just a bit of a statistic because you've not got in there long enough yet. Those sort of kind of comparison issues
Yeah.
can lead to a sense of imposter syndrome. One thing I would say to anybody who feels like that is, having worked with hundreds of people in property and construction now of all layers in their career, right up to kind of CEO, everybody, even if they fit the stereotype, everybody thinks that there's something about them that's not quite right, that doesn't fit in. Everybody
Okay.
feels that at some point. It's really, really common. So that again is a form of self-sabotage. Don't trust it. And any differences you do have actually can work in your favor. They're an asset because they make you unique. They make you stand out. They make your potential leadership in the future more trustworthy and authentic, emphatic, and all of that jazz. So early in your career, it tends to be more around identity. Should
Yeah.
I be here? You might have friends who did the similar sort of grad scheme as you, and you've landed a job in a particularly good company, and they've landed one that's not so great, and you think, but they were better than I was, so why am I here and they're not? Or perhaps I'm not the right personality to fit in. So it's that sense of identity. Should I be here? How did I get here? Is it a mistake? Is it a mistake on their part? Is it a mistake on
Yeah.
my part? It tends to be more around that area, because later in your career you tend to find people, because it's quite a small industry really, people know everybody, and once by the time you've got a point where people establish who you are and your personality and you're known within the industry, that's less of an issue. That tends to be in the early days.
Yeah. And that's then, I guess, why it's really important for people to be able to see role models and people that they see as being similar to themselves, perhaps from a similar background or have worked through similar experiences, because that can potentially help them feel more like they belong and less like they're somewhere that they shouldn't be. Yeah.
Exactly, whether it be kind of culturally, physically,
Yeah.
or a thought, is
Yeah.
so vital.
Yeah. Okay. So that's early in our career. What about later into our career, as perhaps somebody that's been working in the industry maybe 10 years, 20 years, or even further?
With later in your career, it tends to be more about more a judgment of how far you feel you've come
Hmm.
across your career, like the judgment of your career journey. If it's imposter syndrome, it tends to more be that you feel like you've achieved more than you should have, rather than you've not achieved as much as you should have. With imposter syndrome, it tends to be that you feel like somehow you've overachieved and you don't know
Right.
how you get
Yeah.
there. So
Yep.
it might be that you've had some promotions that you're not sure in hindsight you deserve. It might be that you feel like you've got to a point that perhaps your boss or the board look at you and think, oh, that was a mistake, but you're in there now and there's nothing they can do about it. It might be that you feel like you're winging it every day and you don't really understand the industry and everything's moved on. And, one of the things I hear quite often from clients that are a lot more senior in years is this understanding that the industry's changed and the younger people coming through doing things differently, and they're looked up to as a
Yep.
voice of seniority and reason, but actually they don't understand what necessarily is going on the ground, and that the industry's kind of gone out from underneath their feet.
Right. Yep.
They don't deserve their standing anymore because everything's changing around them. And these are not necessarily things that people feel like they can say out loud, because they feel if they say them out loud, they're admitting to the world that they're not very good at their job, which is not true at all. You've got to talk to someone you can trust and someone you're comfortable with, but they're
Yep.
also, just very typical natural human thoughts.
Yep.
But if you keep them contained, they echo and they become louder, and eventually you can end up believing them.
So it sounds to me a lot of this is around perhaps feeling uncomfortable with what you're being told internally, your own
Mhm.
thoughts, making you feel uncomfortable with the situation that you're in, that you deserve to be where you are. And as we said before, sort of more internally. And like you say, if you don't talk to somebody and you let those thoughts continue, you're likely to start to spiral into believing them more and more and more. So one of the things that we want to perhaps do is start to feel more comfortable. How do we work on something like that?
So being comfortable being uncomfortable is a huge life and leadership skill.
Right.
Huge. It
Yep.
should not be underestimated.
Okay.
Um, when I explain it to clients, I often say, if you imagine you've got your comfort zone, it's like a circle around you, right? So
Yep.
you're in your comfort zone. If you was to take a running leap out of your comfort zone, straight as far as you can into something scary, then you're going to get overwhelmed and burnt out. And that's
Right.
not a place you want to be.
Nope.
Okay, so you don't want to be over there in the boiling lava of, oh my goodness, what's going on in the world. But you also don't want to necessarily stay in your comfort zone, because if your comfort zone stays small, it's very easy for you to accidentally step outside of it and be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
All right. So our aim is to make our comfort zone larger, bigger, and you do this through experience. So if you
Okay.
consider that your comfort zone is almost, if you think of a bullseye, like
Yep.
archery, when you're comfort
Yeah.
where you aim for it, and the middle circle is your comfort zone. The next circle is the growth zone. And what
Okay.
that means is anything you do that's just outside your comfort zone is you growing, is you
Okay.
getting better, is you growing in confidence, is you growing in resilience, is you growing in knowledge and expertise.
Mhm.
And the way you want to think about it is you always want to have one foot in your comfort zone and one foot
Okay.
in the growth zone. So
Yep.
every time you take a step further into the growth zone, you're dragging your comfort zone with you. And what
Right.
happens then
Okay. Yeah.
is you don't realize that you're expanding your comfort zone until you look back. You look back and you think, oh my goodness, I couldn't do that before. Oh, and now I don't think anything of it. To give you a personal example, when I was first in a surveyor, I was invited to a lunch and I couldn't go. I was so frightened. It's like, no one go to this lunch and have professional chats with someone one on one where they can ask me any question. I can't do it. By the end of my career, before I left, I
Yeah.
kind of got in a little bit of trouble for constantly being out on lunches. It was like my favourite part of the job.
Brilliant.
So, but at some point, I had to go through the uncomfortableness of stretching that. Now, if I'd taken running leap and gone from I can't do this to a 3-hour lunch with the CEO of a competitive company or something like that, I would have had a breakdown. There was no way I would have got overwhelmed. I would have slept. I would have had anxiety. I might have ended up calling in sick. It just wouldn't have been sensible. But in doing something that's a bit uncomfortable, then I'm dragging that comfort zone with me. So you want to get comfortable in being a bit uncomfortable, because all the while you're a bit uncomfortable,
Yep.
you're growing.
Yep.
Your resilience is growing, your confidence is growing. And then in terms of imposter syndrome, the amount of things that your brain can say to you, what are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. You're a fake. That, there are less and less things it can hold against you because everything else is within your, oh yeah, no, I do know this. I've got this. So think of it as like 3 circles. The middle is your comfort. The second one is the growth zone. And then the outside one is the hot lava of, oh my goodness, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
You always want 1 foot in comfort and 1 foot in uncomfort. That's how I position it.
So it's all about learning the small steps that you can take.
You can only tell you've got more confidence and resilience in hindsight. You don't do something and think, oh my God, I'm confident now. It's amazing. Yeah. What you do, when you stop and look back, you think, oh, I've just done something that a year ago I would have not slept over, and I've just done it. And there would have been incremental steps to get you there. And those you might have to plan, those you might need systems in place. And that might be knowledge, that might be behavior, that might be actions, that might be learning to deal with relationships. It could be all manner of things. You can't really tell that you've got confidence and resilience until you look back.
I think I can recognise that particularly in myself in something around like giving presentations and talking at events, and looking back to how nervous I got the very first time that I did that in a previous job.
Well, now you're hosting a podcast.
Well, now I'm hosting a podcast. Okay then, so as we draw to the end of this podcast, I just wanted to ask you one last question, I think, Emma, and that is, what advice would you give to somebody that's perhaps listening to this podcast now and can relate to the topics that we've been discussing?
I think I would encourage people to remember that even though it's called imposter syndrome, it's not a mental health issue. It's a self-perception situation that is incredibly common. So if you're hearing this and it's ringing bells and it's ringing true, be okay with that for one, and start thinking about, how can I look into this? What can I do next to kind of take this away from myself? Awareness is the first position, and the next one is to get support. So have a look at who's around you. LionHeart is the obvious example here. There are people for you to speak to, and just if you're not ready to speak to someone, you can always give it a Google. But I would suggest speaking to somebody who knows a little bit about it, just so they can give you some next steps and figure out, how can I become more comfortable in myself, build my confidence, build my resilience, and become more comfortable being uncomfortable? How can I accept this is a very normal human response to what is, quite a high-pressured industry?
Thank you so much. So yeah, as we draw to a close, I do want to remind our listeners about LionHeart, and thank you for just mentioning LionHeart, Emma. Firstly, a reminder of our webinar programme, which includes both live and recorded sessions. If you want to learn more about imposter syndrome, then we do have a recorded webinar available in our webinar library, so do go and take a look at that. Secondly, we know that reaching out for support can be hard, but if you are an RICS professional, then LionHeart is here for you. Calls to LionHeart are confidential, and you'll be talking to somebody that understands surveyors and the profession that you work in. Thank you so much for joining me today, Emma. It's been so lovely to talk to you. Really feel like I've learned something about imposter syndrome, and I'm sure that our discussion will have helped many people that listen in. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks so much for joining us on LionHeart Talks, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform to hear from us again, and don't forget you can find out more about how we're helping surveyors and their families on our website, lionheart.org.uk.